What is going on? Cody McBroom here of Tailored Coaching Method. Today we are going to talk all about the latest research of diet breaks, and I'm going to bring in 3 specific researchers to teach you all about it. But before we get into the actual content of this video, do me a huge favor. Hit the subscribe button. We are dropping content like this all the time, and I want to make sure that you are in the loop. So remember, hit subscribe, like the video if you enjoy it after you get done watching, and make sure you hit the little red bell so you can get notified when we actually release new content. So today we're gonna get into diet breaks like I just mentioned, and I'm gonna bring in Jackson Peos, Dr. Bill Campbell, and Dr. Brandon Roberts, 3 researchers who I have had the pleasure of learning from, interviewing on my podcast, and with Brandon Roberts actually working with because he's the Chief Science Officer of Tailored Coaching Method. We're gonna specifically talk about the MATADOR study, Bill Campbell's 2-day refeed study, and the ICECAP Trial, which is Jackson Peos' latest research study on diet breaks. My goal with this video is to teach you everything you need to know about diet breaks, the misconceptions, the benefits, the potential gains, the potential losses, and let you decide if it's something that you should be using in your next fat loss phase. So to start this video off, we're gonna define what a diet break is. We're also going to define what a refeed is. We're gonna start with a refeed because that's the shorter scale of this. A refeed is pretty simple. You can do a 1-day or a 2-day refeed. Some people like to call 3-day refeeds multi-day refeeds, or they will call those a diet break once you're beyond 72 hours. But a refeed is pretty simple. You're gonna bring your calories up to maintenance while being in a deficit. So you take a break from the diet, from the deficit, bringing your calories up to what is your predicted maintenance via carbohydrates. So the increase in calories all comes from carbohydrates. You need to do this for 1 full 24-hour period to be called a refeed day. If you do it 2 days in a row, you have a 2-day refeed. If you have 3 days in a row, you have a multi-day refeed. Beyond 3 days, we go into what is called a diet break. So you can do a diet break for 4 days, 5 days, 6 days, 7 days, up to 2 weeks. This is still considered a diet break. Some would even say that a full month could be considered a diet break because technically you're taking a break from the diet. And although I would agree at the 4-week marker, I tend to believe and call this a maintenance phase with our coaching clients. So the difference between a diet break and a refeed is strictly just the time that you are doing, the duration of the refeeding itself and staying at maintenance, because both are going to be a specific increase in calories from carbohydrates. The history of diet breaks goes way back, but more of an intuitive sense from that historical standpoint. We really didn't start researching it heavily until the MATADOR study came out, which is the first study we're gonna talk about, and I'm gonna bring Jackson on the screen to describe. But the MATADOR study was kind of our cornerstone study for diet breaks in general. Once this came out, we saw so much great evidence to support diet breaks that people started doing one of 2 things: throwing diet breaks at clients left and right, thinking it was this metabolic magic trick that's going to reverse hormonal adaptations and metabolic adaptations, or they were researchers who were gonna pick apart and find out if it really was as good as it seemed, because at the time, it was almost too good to be true. But what we saw in this study was a 16-week no diet break group, so a deficit for 16 straight weeks, versus a group using diet breaks, but had the same duration of deficit, meaning it was 32 weeks long, which is a very long diet. But again, we saw some really, really profound results, and we always have to ask when a study like this comes out, is it as good as it seems? Let's ask Jackson what he thinks about it.
So the group using the 2-week diet breaks after every 2 weeks of dieting in the MATADOR, they maintained a higher resting metabolic rate and they lost more fat over the course of the intervention compared to the continuous dieting group. On face value, you would say, okay, the diet breaks are causing a physiological advantage here, probably allowing us to maintain a higher metabolic rate, and we're burning more calories throughout the day, and that's sort of having a downstream effect on burning more fat across the intervention. That's one simple way to look at it. After looking at the data, the better retention of resting metabolic rate, even though it was significant, doesn't seem to be large enough to explain the size of the fat loss benefits that were seen with the diet break group. From memory, they retained around 150 calories per day more than the continuous dieting group, which is not enough to explain the kilos more fat loss that they achieved. But once I've factored into the preliminary findings of my diet break study, which is called the ICECAP study, we're considering that the diet break group is showing notably lower hunger levels. What I think is that the group who were using the 2-week diet breaks after every 2 weeks of dieting, I think they had lower hunger and more managed hunger And this led to them sticking to the plan a little bit better. And that's what caused the greater amount of fat loss. And when we factor that in, perhaps that's why the notable increase in fat loss that happened over the 15 weeks. Whereas I think in the continuous dieting group, I think their hunger might have just sort of got out of control at times. And that's what caused them to sort of slip off the plan and eat off and potentially slow some of that fat loss.
So as we can see, the MATADOR study probably wasn't as good as we once thought it was. And I'll be the first to admit, when it first came out, I thought it really was this metabolic magic trick that was going to reverse metabolic adaptation. But it did make sense as to why it was working so well. It was lowering stress and improving adherence for people I was working with. And I was using refeeds and diet breaks with almost every single client because I was seeing great results, which you should always think about and lean on. If your experience is showing one thing, lean on that and go with it, because experience doesn't lie, just like research doesn't lie. One of the things I see a lot of people dropping the ball on and taking too far after this MATADOR study came out, because again, this was the first big study to come out, so everybody grabbed it and started running with it, is they don't realize how big of a deficit some of these diet break and refeed studies go into. For example, a lot of coaches ask me, I have my client in a deficit, why aren't they losing weight? Should I use a diet break to try to reverse some of this and get them losing weight again? And my first response is, number one, a diet break doesn't lead to more weight loss. A diet break doesn't trick your metabolism into burning more calories. A diet break is a step away from the diet to just give you a mental break and somewhat of a physical break. But the problem with these people is they're putting their clients into a 5 to 10% deficit and things aren't working. Well, it's just too small of a deficit. The MATADOR study, the 2-day refeed study by Dr. Bill Campbell, a lot of these diet break studies all use large deficits, 15, 20, 25, up to 35% of a calorie reduction, which is why something like the MATADOR study would work well. If you're in a 35% deficit, of course you're gonna lose weight. And you have the right to take 2 weeks off every few weeks because you're in such a big deficit that you not only need that break, but that deficit pays up for all the breaks you're gonna take in the future. And at the end of the month, you are still in a calorie deficit on an average basis. Now, the other part of this study and all these other studies is we have to remember no research is perfect. People criticize research. I've criticized research. We look at these studies and we try to pick it apart. But the problem is it is near impossible to get enough funding and the right recruitment of participants to actually make a study as great and as perfect as we'd want. We're always gonna have critiques. Brandon on our team, who I'm gonna bring up here in a sec, is a great example of explaining this to people over and over and over again on our research reviews because he does the research himself. And the truth is, it's really hard to be able to put together a study that is next to perfect.
So the hard part about diet break studies is, so to do the diet break groups really easy. To do the continuous diet group, like you have 12 weeks of dieting, right? But you finished before the other group because they had 3 weeks of diet breaks. So then you have to put that time on the end of the study because you don't want these people to disappear, right? You need them. Like you want to do the same length, and then they're at maintenance for 3 weeks. So I think that right there, the way you have to design these studies is like an inherent limitation that you, as a scientist, you can't do anything about it. It's just, okay, well, that's just how we have to do things. But it does give you an opportunity to see when those people are at maintenance, how are their hunger levels? How are their body composition? How does things change when you come out of a diet when you've been dieting for 12 weeks straight?
All right, so now we're starting to go back and forth a little bit, but I want to take a step back and I want to essentially reframe this and ask the question, what is the point of doing a diet break? Why do we even want to attempt refeeds? And why are we trying to research this over and over again as an evidence-based fitness and nutrition community?
This was what we're calling a diet refeed study. So to me, I define a diet break as somebody's dieting, let's say for 4 weeks, then they take an entire week off. That would be a diet break. A diet refeed is a break, but it's a little shorter. So we're defining that as 2 days of taking a break from your diet. And the reason we wanted to investigate this was because I'd like to think of diets as just not a place where you want to be very often. If you're going to diet, have a plan and try to diet on as many calories as you possibly can. Don't rush the process. Don't, what we would call crash diets. Because there's actually, when you look at the harms of dieting, there's a lot of them. that happens psychologically and physiologically. Now, I happen to focus on the physiological negative aspects of dieting. Based off of some research in obese males where they found a lot of benefits to just simply taking a break from your diet, we said, well, what if we do this in resistance trained people who are already relatively lean? Will this help prevent the loss of muscle mass on the positive side? Will it cause them to lose more fat on the positive side? Or is it a bad idea altogether? Will they actually gain fat because they're actually going to increase their calories for 2 days?
Okay, based on what Bill just said, it seems really, really good. Almost too good to be true. You know, for one, the muscle glycogen side of things, maintaining muscle mass, that gets really focused and emphasized in these studies because shit, if you can refeed and you can take diet breaks, what if you can maintain more muscle? And his research has shown muscle maintenance. But then we have other professionals in the industry critiquing it, saying that the measures used didn't account for muscle glycogen replenishment and water weight. But then you gotta ask yourself, what is muscle? Technically 79% of muscle is water. So if we're replenishing water and replenishing glycogen, aren't we just replenishing muscle tissue to grow? Therefore, actually that might be effective. The truth is it's hard to tell. And like I said, some of these studies sound too good to be true and some of the things within them are too good to be true. We're still playing this game of ping pong and trying to come to the end conclusions to see exactly why and how these are so effective. After listening to Bill explain that part of it, you got to ask yourself, is this too good to be true? You know, all those things he discussed sound so amazing. Is a diet break really going to do that for us? A good example of that is the whole muscle maintenance thing. That's one of the main focuses of using refeeds. Can we maintain more muscle during a diet? And one of the big critiques for his studies was that they weren't accounting for glycogen replenishment in water. You know, when we do refeeds, we do consume more carbs, which get stored as glycogen, and they pull water in the cell. However, I believe 79% of the muscle tissue is actually just water. Look it up. It's a high percentage. And what that means is even if it was just water and glycogen, who really cares? That is muscle to an extent. So again, too good to be true. In some ways, it does seem that way. However, we do know that dieting is a stress. Dieting causes fatigue. And fatigue and stress build up the longer you are in a diet or the more aggressive you get with that diet. And we need some type of way of recovering and competing against that fatigue that accumulates during the diet in order to sustain fat loss and health, metabolism, muscle, and all these other things that we're trying to hold on to while approaching the diet, which is also what we're going to dive into with this next part of Bill's research.
The group taking the break was able to maintain their muscle mass significantly better than the group that didn't take any breaks. Fat loss was the same. And in addition to protecting their muscle mass, they were also able to maintain their metabolic rate significantly better than the other group. And what we know about that is that sets them up for a greater success for future dieting should they continue to diet. So the last thing you want is a suppressed metabolism, which is what normally happens when you diet and lose weight. There was something about these refeeds that protected their muscle mass and their metabolic rate.
At this point, we're continuing to go back and forth. And this is what I often tell people when they ask me about diet break research. It's one of the most fascinating topics for me to follow in the field of nutrition because it's a game of ping pong from study to study. There's a ton of benefits, there's none benefits. There's physical benefits, it's all just mental. There's some physiological changes, there's absolutely no hormonal changes, and we go back and forth, back and forth. And the truth is we're trying to narrow this down, and this is why when you study a specific category or a topic or an idea or strategy, you can't just leave it at one study. And that's why there's so many studies coming out, and we're just starting to discover the power of diet breaks, or if there is any power of diet breaks. Lucky enough for us, Jackson has that mentality and he continues to dive into the research deeper and deeper and actually try to eliminate all of these negatives or cons that we see in the research studies done prior to this. What can he fix? How can he make it more narrow-minded and focused to the people that we are, athletes and Gen Pop people trying to build more muscle and burn more fat? Lucky enough for us, we do have more and more info about this with Jackson's recent ICECAP trial, which is the most recent diet break study that really dives into this with resistance-trained individuals.
Now, we need to remember that this is in a population of overweight men. The assumption is that they have some difficulties with energy restraint or caloric restraint. So in populations like that, we just can't expect for them to have precise sort of follow dietary protocols precisely. And for those sort of people who are just volunteering in studies, when the hunger gets high enough, they often don't have enough driver to say, okay, I'm going to override these hunger cues and I'm just going to dig in regardless. A lot of the times when the hunger kicks in, they're like, oh, don't like that, I'm going to have a Mars bar sort of thing. And that's essentially why they remain in the body composition state that they do. Whereas I don't think we saw the same fat loss benefits in the ICECAP study with athletes, because I think athletes just have experience and they're a little bit wired differently where things get a little bit tough and they sort of go, oh yeah, well, I knew this was coming. And it's like, it's part of the process and now we get on with it. So I think even though the continuous diet group might have had more hunger when having the diet breaks, I think they sort of just said, oh, well, we know dieting sucks anyway, but that's how you get the results. So they just pushed on and there were less threats to their adherence, even though their hunger was higher.
I tend to have a very similar viewpoint as Jackson on a lot of these diet break studies. And as you're gonna see here, so does the chief science officer on our team, Dr. Brandon Roberts.
Like you said, 16 weeks of dieting versus 30 weeks of 2 weeks of dieting, 2 weeks of diet break, right? That's not really realistic. Nobody's going to take a 2-week diet break every 2 weeks. But they did show quite impressive results when it comes to the metabolic adaptation effect. And if you look at their kind of study design and you look at what it was based on, you can see that it kind of matches the literature where 2 weeks seems to be the low point of metabolic adaptation when you're dieting. Like that's like you hit your max adaptive point. And so over time, if you come out of it, your metabolism will increase, but it takes a little time. So now we have to ask the question, okay, so if 1 week doesn't matter and 2 weeks does, at least according to the literature, a little bit, is there a 10-day diet break that's like the sweet spot where you can do a diet break, get your metabolism to bounce back a little bit and use that as an effect? No, I don't know.
So at this point, we're getting a little more granular and specific with the research of diet breaks. We're using it on individuals that are more similar to the people watching this video. They're similar to you and I. They're similar to the clients I work with. And so we're getting more and more context out of these studies. And what we're realizing, it truly is mainly adherence-based and psychological. So we can improve the stress and the adherence and the hunger and the cravings and these things and a little bit of performance, but there's not a whole lot of physiological changes going on during these diet breaks unless we extend them further and further, which is why a lot of natural bodybuilders and even myself and some of the clients I work with who will commit to a longer period of time in any type of coaching relationship or dieting phase, we break it up, and instead of using a diet break, we might actually want to look into using a maintenance phase. We know, based on research, that the metabolic adaptation starts to pick up throughout a diet after a few weeks. And we also know that we start to see some kind of reversal or low end of that metabolic adaptation after 2 to 3 weeks of taking a diet break and refeeding. So if we need to take that much time off the diet, it's almost too much time to consistently diet. So you might get value out of dieting specifically in a deficit for say 12 to 16 weeks. And instead of taking a small diet break, let's take 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4 months completely off the diet at maintenance and then jump back in to the diet to continue that fat loss phase. And as Brandon's gonna share here, there's a lot of natural pro bodybuilders doing this exact same thing.
So this is what you described is where the kind of really good natural physique athletes and some non-natural are going, where like there's a pre-diet to the competition diet. You diet for like 3 or 4 months and then you take a diet break and you just sit at maintenance for a couple months. And then you go back into your competition prep diet and you go all the way to your competition.
All right, so let's recap here. We've talked to 3 highly trained and qualified professionals who have all done research with fat loss, muscle growth, metabolism, and many, many other things. They are the experts in this field. And as you can see, it definitely went back and forth. And there's a lot of it depends and context specific things. But I want to give you a kind of step-by-step or recap bullet point Cliff Notes style summary of what I think you should take away from this and use for yourself when you go to diet or for your clients if you're a coach listening to this. Like, what are the things that I have done personally that have been extremely successful working with people around the world and giving my team to do with their clients using diet breaks specifically? The first thing we have to make sure we understand and tell our clients when we're working with them is that after all the research done, we now know that it is primarily a psychological benefit that we get out of diet breaks. I'm gonna go over a few more benefits, but the main thing here is it's not a metabolic reaction, it's a psychological one. So you are going to limit stress because as you go through a diet, stress gets higher. And we even have research to show that as you go deeper into a deficit, cortisol even increases, the stress hormone. So we may even see some blunting of the cortisol response, which would make a lot of sense because carbohydrates and calories in general spike insulin. Insulin also blunts cortisol. So not only are we going to drop that cortisol response if we feed more often or with higher calories and carbs, but also nutrition in general being plentiful is going to lead to less cortisol overall and we're not thinking about food as much. We're far less food focused. So we know that our adherence, our compliance to the plan, our hunger, and even our cravings, all of these stress markers, all of these diet fatigue markers, they're all going to decrease during a diet break and shortly after. So if we implement diet breaks, we might have more time throughout the period of dieting or deficit or fat loss phase in general with less of this stress, and that's gonna lead to better longevity for the diet. Diet breaks may also help performance. This seems kind of obvious because if you take more calories in, you're probably gonna have more fuel. You're probably gonna recover better. You're probably gonna be able to perform better in the gym. However, most research until the recent ICECAP trial done by Jackson Peos, they haven't really looked at performance in any metric. And what Jackson found was that muscular endurance actually increased during the diet break period. Now, most of us watching this want to improve strength, we want to change our body composition, and some of you may be into endurance sports. Does this muscular endurance aspect help us at all? Maybe not, but I would bet on it also having an effect on total volume because there is no study on diet breaks that purposefully increased volume during a diet break. But if we're able to improve muscular endurance because we have more muscle glycogen, it's just another way of us saying we can squeeze out more reps. Well, what are more reps? It's more volume. So maybe we stop taking a deload during a diet break and using that as a full recovery phase, which many people do, and I have done in my career, in my own personal journey as well. And instead, we use that as some sort of peaking strategy or overreaching strategy. When we implement a diet break, we actually add sets and reps. So we do more work, we do more volume, we try to drive more blood into the muscle and get as much out of those carbs and calories that we're taking in as possible. Not only may this lead to better recomposition during those diet break phases, but it may also lead to better muscle maintenance. And if I could perfectly design a study in the future, I would design it that way, where we implement diet breaks every 3 or 4 weeks and we purposely increase volume along with the diet breaks to see if there was a recomposition effect or just generally more muscle maintenance throughout the process of that diet. When taking a diet break for 2 weeks or potentially more, we know that's when we start to see some kind of reversal potentially of these metabolic adaptations. Now, even though the metabolic adaptations that occur with the diet, they are temporary, we can reverse those later on and help recover our body fully. We also know that the reversal process is temporary. So even though you may see some reversal of those metabolic adaptations that occurred during dieting, they're gonna come right back once you get into the deficit, shortly after. So it's short-lived. But the good thing about this that it lets us know is that this might allow us to push the pause button on those metabolic adaptations a little bit more to slow them down from happening to us. Or if we take an even longer period, say 4, 6, 8 weeks, like I talked about earlier, where it's more of a maintenance phase, we might actually be able to see a lot of reversal with those metabolic adaptations, and that could lead to better sustainability of fat loss in the long run when we're talking 1 to 2 years of chasing your fitness goals. So we also know that muscle maintenance is potential, but it's still unclear, and I think that's the most important thing to take away from this is we don't really know. However, it's more likely good to take the diet break and potentially maintain muscle than completely skip it and lose out on any benefit that it could have. Because we do know it does replenish muscle glycogen and we do know that it improves some kind of performance during the diet break phase, both of which help maintain muscle better. So I would personally use this in my coaching strategy, and I would recommend you do it too because you have nothing to lose by trying to maintain more muscle. And the other thing to realize during this video is that you need to diet really hard or for really long or completely step out of the gym to lose a significant amount of muscle. So on one side of this, you really don't need to worry about it that much as long as you're training hard and eating enough protein. And the other side of this is no harm, no foul. Why not try and just make sure you do everything you can to maintain all the muscle you have because you worked your ass off before the diet to achieve that. The last thing I will say with this, if you are a more committed individual, this is something I've done personally and I've used with multiple clients and we've seen natural bodybuilders do it, so I want to bring it back up. Just think about periodizing your plan for a little bit longer. Instead of constantly needing diet breaks, a good solution is to attack the diet. Build self-discipline and just get after it. Spend 8 to 16 weeks. I know that's a wide range, but it depends on where you're at and where you want to go. Spend 8 to 16 weeks, 2 to 4 months, just attacking the diet, not taking diet breaks. Maybe a refeed day here and there, depending on social events or if performance is dropping through the tank. But the big thing is stick to the deficit for the entire 8 to 16 week period. Then take a maintenance phase. It is a diet break, but it is much longer, and that's why I'm calling it a maintenance phase. This is where you would spend at least 1, but up to 3 or 4 months at maintenance recovering. Yes, you will gain a few pounds, but it is more than likely just water, muscle glycogen, and food volume in your gut. I have done this with many clients, and if you bring up to what your new maintenance actually would be and you didn't be too aggressive during that initial 8 to 16 week deficit period, you are not going to gain body fat back because you're not going into a surplus. All you're going to do is improve performance, you're going to improve your sleep, you're going to manage stress better, and you're going to reverse any of those adaptations that did happen because you're spending enough time at that maintenance level calories. And once you are there for 4, 6, 8, 12 weeks even, then you step back into another deficit just as, if not more aggressive than the first one, and you finish off the cut to get to your actual end goal. So it's kind of like stopping halfway there, taking a good break for longer than a few weeks, and then jumping back into it to reach your final destination. All right, guys, that's all I got for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like this style of content, please do me a favor and let me know. Comment below, hit the like button, and make sure you are subscribed to this channel so you can get updated every time we drop a new educational video. I'll see you next time.